Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa nusalli ala Rasulihil Kareem. Nabiyyina wa Habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma 'allimna bima yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna 'ilman nafi'a ya Rabbil Alameen. Amma ba'd. Eid Mubarak to you all. Kullu 'aam wa antum bi khair. Taqabbalallahu minna wa minkum salihul a'mal. Someone sent me a reel the other day. It was a guy. He was trying to get down all the responses for Eid. If someone says Kullu 'aam wa antum bi khair, what do you say? Right? If someone says to you Taqabbalallahu minna wa minkum salihul a'mal, what do you say? And then so the guy was prepared. He's like, okay, I'm ready. And then finally on Eid day, when he's meeting everybody, the joke is, a random uncle says everything, he has all the responses, and then suddenly he hits them with, I forgot what it was, it's like, something like, or something like that. So then the joke is his dad staring at him like, do you know the answer to this? And then he says, he's like, Inshallah, so he didn't know what to say. It was very funny, but it's kind of like that too. It's like, especially if you have to, what do they call it, code switch between like English, Urdu, Arabic. Like you have people saying, Eid Mubarak, Eid Mubarak. That's usually what the Desi say. They don't say anything else. And then the Arabs between the different, backgrounds, everybody might say something different. Everybody has something different to say. But I hope you all had a good Eid Salah. I hope everybody was able to spend time with their families and their loved ones and celebrate and continue to celebrate because it's still Eid, technically. You are supposed to celebrate for the days known as Ayyam al-Tashriq. Right? That means the days where the meat is drying, because Yawm al-Nahr is the day of Eid, and that's the day in which sacrifice the animals, and then you have the meat. Prepare the meat, leave it to dry, or you cook it, what have you. Those days, the 11th, 12th, and until Asr of the 13th, are the days of Tashriq. And the Prophet ﷺ said that these days are in Eid for us, for the people of Islam, and they are days of eating, drinking, and remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so I do want to leave enough time for Q&A, inshallah. Maghrib Adhan is currently at 8:26, inshallah. So maybe around 8:10, 8:15-ish, 8:10, I think that's a good time. I'll tell myself 8:05, because sometimes time gets away from me. So, we'll leave time for that, inshallah. Adhan, Maghrib, and then social hour or whatnot, which inshallah if people are worried about being outside and if it starts raining, because I don't know, first it said that it was going to start raining today at like 7 or 8 p.m. and then when I checked the forecast again it said like 1 a.m. so I don't know, it's Houston weather. If it starts raining, we'll have a small hall, inshallah. It's available. It's called small hall, but it's pretty big, and as well as the Imam's office, it's also pretty big. That may sound kind of weird, but it's really open and spacious. You don't have to feel like you're at the principal's office or something, or in detention. So, last time, I went over most of the youth of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Right? We have the first interaction, the first story of Ibrahim alayhi salam is between him and who? You can say it out loud. His father. His father, Azza. That's the very first instance we have of Ibrahim alayhi salam's wife, Ibrahim alayhi salam's life. And after that, the next story was when he destroyed all the idols. He said, I'm feeling sick. He stayed behind. He destroyed all the idols except the big one. Then he left the axe with the big one. And then the next part, I mentioned there's some inconsistency in what historians say the timeline actually is, right? I mentioned one of the first inconsistencies was, does the king meet with Ibrahim alayhi salam before they throw him in the fire or after? Right? Was throwing him into the fire kind of like the last straw after meeting the king? Or did the king want to meet with Ibrahim alayhi salam because he heard all of the ruckus and people talking about, this boy destroyed the idols and he threw him in the fire and nothing happened to him? Right? Either way, it doesn't make much of a difference. Right? It doesn't make much of a difference. And then, subhanAllah, I wanted to make a quick point about the king at that time, the king of Babylon. His name was what? Namrud. And in English, or the Latinized version is what? Nimrod, right? And I mentioned, it's said about these kings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave kingdom to, or kingdom of all of mankind to 4 individuals. 2 of them were disbelievers, 2 of them were believers. And we talked about this. The first disbeliever we already mentioned, Nimrod. The second disbeliever was Fir'aun. Others mention Nebuchadnezzar or Bukhtanasar. The 2 believing kings were Dhul-Qarnayn and Sulaiman alayhi salam. You see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bless somebody with so much. Can you imagine being considered king of the entire world? He wasn't the only king in the world, because we know later in the story, Ibrahim a.s. will come across another king. But he was considered to be king of the entire world, right? He was the most powerful king, and he was king of the most powerful nation, the center of civilization at the time, Babylon. And yet, he let it get to his head. He was ungrateful, and he thought himself a god. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humiliate him? I mentioned this, right? Nowadays, well, not just that. I'm just talking about his legacy as a person. The word Nimrod means what? A fool, an idiot, right? If somebody's dumb, you call them a Nimrod. So his name has become an insult. And then on top of that, it was narrated, and this isn't something that we find in our sources. So, and I mentioned this before, when it comes to stories of the prophets, when it comes to a lot of stories of previous nations, people of the past, we know whatever's in the Quran, whatever's in the Hadith, especially authentic Hadith, we take it, right? We don't ask questions for its authenticity. We don't try to figure out, okay, is this actually true or not? We believe it to be true. Everything else that we find that kind of fills in the blanks is from biblical sources. And is it true? Is it not true? Allahu A'lam. We don't affirm it, nor do we reject it. But we can affirm it if it agrees with the Quran and the Sunnah, and we can reject it if it blatantly goes against the Quran and the Sunnah and what we believe about our prophets and messengers. So there is the story that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent flies to destroy his army, and there's even a story that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a mosquito and it flew up his nose and basically reached all the way up into his skull, into his brain. And it bothered him so much, the only relief he had from this mosquito was to smash his face with a hammer. Right? This is probably from biblical sources, right? Because it's not established or affirmed in the Quran or the Hadith. But these are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do to a person when they are ungrateful, when they are they've been given so much in this life, and then they think too highly of themselves, and especially they cross the line and think of themselves as a god. I can give life and I can give death. That's what he thought. So your God isn't so special, I can do anything he does. And then Ibrahim a.s. what did he do? He said, قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق فأتي بها من المغرب. He said, verily Allah, He can bring the sun from the east and He can set it in the west. فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. He was dumbfounded, the king. He had no response. No response at all. So, after this, we have the other discrepancy in the timeline. And I mentioned this one second because of where it could possibly happen. It's a lot further apart than meeting with the king. Okay? And that's the famous story of Ibrahim alayhi salam looking at a planet, looking at the moon, and looking at the sun. We all know the story, right? So, the two opinions are that, one, when he was still a young boy, he didn't receive prophethood, he was a young boy, he had been questioning his father about the idols, why we worship them, why this, why that. Some of the historians and scholars will say that he came upon one night, he was just looking out at the sky, kind of stargazing, and he saw a planet, right? Some people say a star, but the word used in the Quran, in Surah Al-An'am, is فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلُ رَأَى كَوْكَبًا. And what is a kawkab? What does it translate to? Planet. Right? It translates to a planet. So, it's still interesting because, you still see translators use the word star. Okay? Because even to the naked eye, you might notice, like sometimes if you look at the moon, right, for my stargazers out there, if you just look at the moon with the naked eye, sometimes you'll see something really bright next to it. It looks just like a star. Sometimes those are actually planets. It could be Jupiter, it could be Venus, it could be Mars. Those are usually the planets that you see. It looks like a star. Regardless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when the night grew dark upon him, meaning Ibrahim alayhi salam, he saw a star or a planet and he said, قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ قَالَ لَا أُحِبُّ الْآفِلِينَ. So, here's one thing to keep in mind as well. When you recite this, right, your tone actually matters. Does Ibrahim alayhi salam say, قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي? Or does he say, هَذَا رَبِّي? You guys hear that, right? So, is he saying that this must be my Lord, this must be my God? Or is he saying, is this my God? Right? It's kind of like in Black Panther when Killmonger goes, is this your king? Right? He's saying it almost rhetorically, right? There's no way it's this. Why? Because فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ, when it set, when it went away, right? The daytime comes and you don't see the stars anymore. قَالَ لَا أُحِبُّ الْآفِلِينَ. I do not love things that set. If it disappears, there's no way it can be my God. And then what came next? The next night, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الْقَمَرَ بَازِغًا قَالَ, what is it? هَذَا رَبِّي? Or هَذَا رَبِّي? That was a little bit harder to tell. Okay? So some of the scholars will explain it as he wasn't necessarily thinking that this was his God. It was more of a statement that there's no way this can be my God. And regardless of when this happened, it makes more sense that he's saying that he's asking it in a way that there's no way this can be my God. Because we know that all of the prophets and messengers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved them from ever committing shirk. Right? So if it's more of a question of disbelief that there's no way this can be my God, that falls in line with what we believe about the prophets and messengers. So when the moon came, when he saw the moon rising, he said, this one is my Lord. But when it disappeared, he said, قَالَ لَئِن لَمْ يَهْدِنِي رَبِّي لَأَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الضَّالِّينَ. If my Lord does not guide me, I will certainly be one of the misguided people. And then finally, when the sun came up, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي هَذَا أَكْبَرُ فَلَمَّا أَفَلَتْ قَالَ لَئِن لَمْ يَهْدِ قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِّمَّا تُشْرِكُونَ. When he saw the sun shining, he said, this must be my Lord, it is the greatest. But again, when it set, he declared, O my people, I totally reject whatever you associate with Allah in worship. Now, if this happened when he was a young boy, the context in which it's mentioned in the Quran, it actually actually kind of makes sense, because after he rejects the sun being his God, he says, "Oh my people." He wouldn't have said this to another group of people, that, "Oh my people." Right? He wouldn't have said this to strangers. And the response that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives from his people, وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُ, and his people argued with him. قَالَ أَتُحَاجُّونِي فِي اللَّهِ وَقَدْ هَدَانِ. He said, "Are you arguing with me about Allah while He has guided me? وَلَا أَخَافُ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ بِهِ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ رَبِّي شَيْئًا وَسِعَ رَبِّي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا أَفَلَا تَتَذَكَّرُونَ." I'm not afraid of whatever idols you associate with Him. None can harm me unless my Lord wills. And my Lord encompasses everything in His knowledge. Will you not be mindful? So, according to this context, it makes sense that this could have happened when he was a young boy, and then he was trying to talk to his people about it. He was telling them that, look, these are some of the proofs, some of the logical explanations as to why your idols and everything that you worship, it doesn't make sense. There has to be some greater being. So, the second opinion is that when he left his home, when he left Babylon, he came across a people that were worshipping the stars, right? And some of the historians even say that it was, in particular, they worshipped the planet Venus. And as an example, he told the people that, look, this planet, it must be our God, but it goes away. And I don't love things that just go away and vanish. The moon, that must be God. But then it goes away. So there's some misguidance here. He's asking the true God, one true God, to guide me. Then the sun is much bigger and brighter than both that star and the moon. Both the planet, Venus, and the moon. It's brighter, stronger, bigger. That must be it. But no, it's not it. So I'm free from whatever you guys are associating with. And there's one true God that you should believe in and you should worship. So once again, it doesn't make much of a difference when it took place. We just know that Ibrahim alayhi salam, he never once actually believed that a planet, the moon, the sun could be Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. After the incident with the king, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he knew he had to leave, so he took his wife Sarah and he took his cousin or nephew Lut, and he left. They migrated. Right? And I mentioned this is something that we have to do if we find ourselves incapable of worshipping Allah alone. If there's no way for us to do so, if our lives are in danger because we choose to worship Allah and worship Him alone, then we have to do everything in our power to find a place where we can. Alhamdulillah, we are able to. And I would like to say that most of the world you are able to, but that's actually not true. But Ibrahim alayhi salam, he left and he was heading west, right? Because Babylon or Mesopotamia, it's in Iraq. He started heading west, and he ended up in Egypt. His nephew Lut, he took his family, he took his wife, and it doesn't mention if he was married and had daughters at the time, but Lut, he ended up somewhere else. He didn't go to Egypt, and even when Ibrahim alayhi salam left Egypt and ended up in Palestine, he wasn't exactly with him. He was somewhere else. Now, I mentioned Lut alayhi salam, who was a prophet in his own right. It said that he was either his cousin or his nephew. Right? Most of the narrations mention that he was the son of his brother who had passed away. So you can take it, either cousin or nephew. Now his wife Sarah, interestingly, as a kid myself, I didn't hear much about her background. Right? Raise your hand if you don't know anything about Sarah other than the fact that she was the wife of Ibrahim alayhi salam and the mother of Ishaq. Okay. For those of you that didn't raise your hand, what are some other facts that you know about her? You can raise your hand and I'll call on you. Class is in session. No? Not everybody raised their hand. So I'm assuming somebody knows some details. No? Okay, that's one. She's very pretty. Were you going to say the same thing?
Well, the Zamzam thing is from her actions, right?
No, not Sarah, that was Haque. We'll get to that. Anyone else? Okay. So, it was said that Sarah was the daughter of one of Ibrahim a.s. uncles. So they were cousins. And yes, it was said about Sarah that she was beautiful. And not just she was a little pretty, right? The historians say that nobody has been mentioned as being more beautiful than Sarah than Haque, our mother, the wife of Adam. Right? So I guess in the hierarchy of beautiful women, number one is Haque, number two is Sarah. And then after that, you all can debate as much as you want. So, that's what was said about her, that she was, basically the second most beautiful woman in the world in all of history. And when they got married, Sarah was the only one that believed in Ibrahim a.s. Lut, his nephew, believed in him, but he ended up being a prophet as well. So from those that weren't prophets, Sarah was the only being in existence at that time that believed in Ibrahim a.s. So they went from Iraq, they passed through, Asham, and they went into Egypt. Now when they got there, there's a long hadith that actually outlines what happens. And there's another hadith that gives a little bit more details. And I'm going to go over this hadith, and hopefully it doesn't take up all of our time, but it's pretty long and requires a little bit of details. I mentioned that Ibrahim a.s., it said that he lied a few times. But we mentioned that they're not blatant lies. They're considered more there's hidden meaning behind what he's saying. There's a double meaning. Right? When he said, so the hadith goes, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه. So Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه, he reported that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam never told a lie except in 3 situations. 2 times for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he said, قال إني سقيم, I'm sick. Right? When they were all going out to celebrate and have their party that they have, he said, I'm sick, I'm going to stay behind. And when he said that it was the big one that did it, بَلْ فَعَلَهُ كَبِيرُهُمْ هَذَا, when they were talking about destroying the idols, it was the big one that did it. That was number 2. And those 2 were for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? He said, I'm sick, but what he really meant was, I'm sick and tired of you guys worshiping these idols. You guys look dumb, stop doing it, you don't listen to me, it's making me sick. And when he said it was the big one, it was to prove a point that, hey, if you really believe that these gods can do anything for you, why can't you believe that it was the big idol that destroyed all of the little ones? And the 3rd time was because of his wife, Sarah. It was to protect her and to protect himself. So the hadith mentions that she was very good looking amongst the people. So he said to her, if these people were to know that you are my wife, this is when he entered Egypt, okay? Just keep that in mind. If they were to know that you are my wife, they would snatch you away from me, right? And they're strangers. They might even just kill him. King's orders, we're going to execute you. And king's going to take your wife. So if these people were to know that you're my wife, they would snatch you away from me. So if they ask you, tell them that you are my sister. And in fact, you are my sister in Islam. Alright, we're all brothers and sisters in Islam. That fact doesn't go away even if you're husband, wife, father, son, right? Siblings. Well, then you're actually brother and sister, but you're my sister in Islam. You're the only one that believes alongside with me. And I do not know of any other Muslim in this land besides you and I. Not just in the land, in the entire world. Right? As I mentioned, Lut alayhi salam, he went away and he became a prophet himself. But there's no other Muslims out there. And when they entered that land, in Egypt, the tyrants came to see her, and then they went and said to the king, right, there comes to your land a woman whom you alone deserves to possess. Right? These people, they just came in, they came through our borders, and we saw them. And there's one woman, she's beautiful, and we believe that nobody else deserves her except you, because you're the king. So the king sent someone to her, and she was brought to the king. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, he couldn't say anything. What was he going to say? Right? He didn't want to put his life or his wife's life in danger. So he started to pray. He stood in prayer. And when she visited the king, they called her, they summoned her. He would try to approach her, right? Basically, he just wanted to be alone with her, and he tried to approach her, and he reached his hand out to her. When he did this, now these details are mentioned in a different hadith, right? So this hadith says, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So Abu Hurairah also radiallahu anhu narrated this hadith. So when Ibrahim alayhi salam migrated with his wife Sarah, they came into a place, we know it's Egypt, and there was a king from amongst the kings, and he was a tyrant from amongst the tyrants. This is the wording of the hadith. So then, like I said, it was said that Ibrahim alayhi salam, دخل Ibrahim, so he told his wife that, you know, you're with me, you're my sister. If they come and ask you, you're my sister. And then we mentioned all of this until when it comes to the king coming to her. So what did Sarah do when the king started approaching her? She also got up. She went. She tried to get away from him a bit. And the hadith actually says she went and made wudu. Right? We don't know how that wudu was, but some type of spiritual purification, ritual purification, right? Some type of wudu. And then she started to pray. We don't know what type of prayer it was. It could have just been, you know, she put her hands up and started making dua. But the word says, tawadda wa tusalli. She performed ablution or wudu, and she began to pray. فَقَالَتْ, what did she say? اللهم إن كنت آمنت بك وبرسولك وأحصنت فرجي إلا على زوجي فلا تسلط علي الكافر. This was a dua she made. She said, "Oh Allah, I have believed in you and your messenger, and I have protected myself, I have preserved myself, I have kept myself chaste except for my husband. So do not allow this kafir, this disbeliever, right? Do not allow him to go on with whatever he's trying to do. Stop him." So this was the dua she made every time the king tried to approach her. Some of you may have already heard this story. The king approached her multiple times. It's said about 3 times, right? So when the king would reach his hand out to her, she would pray and she would make this dua. And as he was doing so, there's a couple of narrations for this as well. They would say his hand would just stop. He couldn't reach out anymore. And some other narrations mention that his legs would start shaking like crazy. It was as if he was having some type of seizure. And he couldn't move. And he was dumbfounded as well. He was, what's going on? How is this possible? So he said that was now tied up even more tightly than the first time, right? And this was painful for him. He couldn't move his hand, his legs were seizing, and he was in a lot of pain. So then he said the same thing. Pray to Allah, supplicate to Allah so that He may release my hand, and I will do no harm. So then she did so. And then he did it again. Right? Didn't learn his lesson. This is the type of arrogance these people had. You have clear signs of something not normal going on here. Something supernatural, metaphysical, whatever you want to call it. This isn't normal. And yet he still did it again. And she made the dua for the third time. And then again, he said, supplicate to your Lord so that He may set my hand free, and I shall do no harm to you. So when she did this, he then called the person who brought her to him. And he started chewing him out. He said that, you did not bring me a human being, you brought me a shaitan. Right? He couldn't even believe that this was actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was her dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was stopping him. So you brought me some type of devil. This is some demon. Right? This woman, you need to take her away from me. So she said, just get rid of these people. Her and her travel companion, her brother, whoever that is, get rid of them. I don't want them in my land. And then I guess as a sign of good faith, because if you're dealing with, if you truly think in your mind that you're dealing with a demon or a devil, you kind of want to, if you're scared of them and you want to appease them. So as a sign of goodwill, of good faith, he gifted Sarah a servant by the name of Haque. And then Sarah went back to Ibrahim alayhi salam. She found him praying. She had Hajar with her. And then Ibrahim asked her, he said, how did you come back? How have you returned? And she said, with full safety, I have returned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held the hand of that tyrant and He gave me a servant as a gift. And then Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he said about the servant, he said, فَتِلْكَ أُمُّكُمْ يَا بَنِي مَاءِ السَّمَاءِ, that the servant that was gifted to Sarah is your mother, O people, or O Bani, O sons of the rain from the sky. Why did he call them that? Because the Arabs, they didn't used to always stay in one place. They would always go around looking for water, right? So if they saw water falling from the sky, they would go to it, try to gather the water. If they saw certain birds flying around, they would try to go to it because that type of bird only flies around where there's water sources, stuff like that. That's why they were called Ya Bani Ma'i Sama. And we know that Hajar, she's somebody also very special in this story. So when they left Egypt, they then ended up in Palestine and they settled there. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he settled in an area which today is called Al-Khalil or Khalil. Have you guys heard of this place in Palestine? Hebron, right? It's called Al-Khalil. Why? Because Ibrahim alayhi salam is Khalilullah. Right? It's a nickname that he earned for himself, being the beloved friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why where he lived, and they say that he's buried there, and Sarah is buried there, and Yaqub and Ishaq and their wives are buried there. How many of you have been to Masjid Khalil? One? Any of the sisters? No? Okay. It's interesting, and it's very, it's historic, and when you go there, they show you all of the maqams of the people buried there, and but subhanAllah, Hebron as a place, though, it's quite depressing, right? Because that's like one of the most. It's like if you want to know what segregation looked like back in the day, you go to Hebron, because that's how it is. There's roads where Palestinians aren't allowed to walk. Right? We're walking towards the masjid, and the tour guide's like, I can't walk with you. I have to take another route, because Palestinians aren't allowed to walk on the street. And you have soldiers everywhere with their guns and rifles, and there's checkpoints and fences and everything. And But you go for the sake of showing support for the Palestinian people, and also it's part of our heritage, right? We have to go and see these places as well and give it our support. But that's where he settled, and the years went by. A lot of years went by actually, and Sarah, being the wife of Ibrahim alayhi salam, she was unable to conceive a child, and she felt very badly about it. Because now, they're getting older. Ibrahim alayhi salam is now in his 80s. Right? So can you imagine when Ibrahim alayhi salam was talking to his father and his people, I mentioned that it's quite possible that he was a teenager at the time. Some of the historians say that he could have been around like 16 years old. He was old enough to discern right and wrong. He was mature, and he could have been 16 by the time he was kicked out. And now he's in his 80s, and he still doesn't have a child. And he really wanted a child. And Sarah felt badly about this. It's not her fault, but she felt badly. So she gifted Haque, who was a servant, to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And he said, take her as a wife, and maybe she can bear you a child. So then Ibrahim alayhi salam took Hajar as a wife. And then she gave birth to Ismail alayhi salam. And because of this, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he told us that, raise your hand if you're Egyptian. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he mentioned to the companions that if you go to their land and you meet the people of Egypt, right, be good to them. Because that's basically your family, they're your cousins. Because Hajar was from Egypt, and she gave birth to Ismail. Ismail is the father of the Arabs of Mecca, the Quraysh, the Adani Arabs. Right? Not the pure Qahtani Arabs, that's a different bloodline. But the Qurashi, the Quraysh, Banu Hashim, the Prophet's lineage, it's all, and the rest of the Arabs in Mecca, it's all from Ismail, from Hajar alayhi salam. And now some people they believe Hajar to be just simply some servant or some slave that was given to Sarah as a gift. And this might be because of biblical sources. Because the biblical sources don't prop up Hajar as much as Islam does. They don't even consider any prophets to be from her lineage. It mentions in the Old Testament that the covenant or the promise that God gives to the children of Abraham, his lineage, the covenant is through Ishaq, through Isaac, not through Ismail. But because Ismail is still a son of Abraham, of Ibrahim alayhi salam, his lineage will be that of kings. That there will be a lot of kings from his lineage, not a prophet. The prophets will be only from the lineage of Isaac or Ishaq, and through him Yaqub and Yusuf and all the other prophets that came. And this is kind of true, except for the fact that the last and final messenger and the best of the prophets and the Khatam al-Anbiya al-Mursaleen, the seal of the prophets and the best of creation, mercy to mankind, came from Ismail alayhi salam, our beloved messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Hajar, majority of the Islamic historians and scholars, right, and Muslims in general, we have a lot more respect, we have a lot more reverence for Hajar alayhi salam. So was she a servant gifted to Sarah? Yes. But some historians, Muslim historians, they argue that she herself, Hajar alayhi salam, was of noble lineage. She wasn't just some random slave girl that they purchased from the slave market and he just gifted to Sarah. She was actually somebody of noble lineage, and the king had gifted her to Sarah to show that, I'm serious about being on your good side after you caused me to freeze 3 times. So, some historians even say that Hajar quite possibly was the daughter of this king. So this shows that Hajar alayhi salam was of noble lineage, married to a prophet of noble lineage, and had a child who was a prophet of noble lineage. And his descendant was Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who was of the best lineage. It's mentioned in the hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was from the most pure lineage. Right? So if that's the case, then his great grandmother had to have been from a pure and noble lineage as well. So that was Hajar. Now, when she bore a child, I think we're doing okay on time. When she bore a child, Sarah, alayhi salam, naturally she got jealous. She got jealous. And this is something sometimes people, they'll argue about. Like, no, she didn't get jealous. That's just another biblical source. But no, a lot of scholars, they actually say that, no, she got jealous. It's only natural. You were the first wife, and you were trying to have a child for so long, and then out of your own concern and love for your husband and his wants and needs, and to further his lineage, you gifted him, Hajar to take as a wife, and right away she bore a son. Naturally, you'll feel some type of way. Right? Us guys, we don't have babies and stuff, so we don't know what that's like really. But I'm sure a woman would understand that. You would feel that, why couldn't I have been able to do this? So naturally, she felt some type of way about Hajar alayhi salam, and it caused her to have, not hatred, right? Some narration, some stories, random, tall tales, fictitious stories about Sarah and Hajar. They'll mention things like, oh, she would try to, she tried to kill her one time, or she's the one who told Ibrahim alayhi salam to get rid of Hajar and Ismail. This isn't true. Yes, she was jealous, and there's some narration that even mentioned that when Hajar would go to visit Ibrahim alayhi salam, she used to wear such a long thobe that the back of it would sweep away her tracks, so that Sarah wouldn't know she came to visit. Right? That's how concerned she was about Sarah's feelings for her. She didn't want Sarah to know that she was around. And subhanAllah, you hear some stories. I don't know if it's worth mentioning or not, but there's even like a story that out of her jealousy, she didn't harm Hajar alayhi salam, but there seemed to have been an order to have Hajar's ears pierced. Nowadays that sounds normal, but some of the historians actually say that this was the first time in history that any woman had her ears pierced. So, you hear these things, but none of these things are confirmed to be authentic. But enough scholars have mentioned that Sarah was jealous, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of His command for Ibrahim alayhi salam to take Hajar and Ismail and take them out of Palestine and take them to the valley of Makkah. Right? That was one of the names for Makkah. This was done as a mercy. It was done as a mercy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He had a greater plan. And I'll go over that very quickly, because this is a story we've probably heard hundreds, thousands of times maybe. So when Sarah's jealousy was getting to be a lot, and it was causing, some issues here and there, minor issues, but it's never a good situation to have that much friction all the time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His mercy, He commanded Ibrahim alayhi salam to then take Hajar and Ismail. They ventured south to Makkah, where there's nothing. Ibrahim alayhi salam himself, he described it as a valley in which there's no vegetation, there's nothing green. It's just sand and rocks and hills and valleys and mountains everywhere. So when he did this, he turned around to Hajar and Ismail. He looked at him one last time. He turned away from them and he started to walk away without Hajar and Ismail. But they had some rations, they had some food, maybe some water skin to drink water from. But that wasn't going to last them very long. And everywhere they looked, it's all sand and rocks and dirt and no greenery anywhere, nothing. So then, what did Hajar say to Ibrahim alayhi salam? And honestly, this is truly one of the most beautiful narrations that you'll ever come across that shows true reliance, true tawakkul, true submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You find this in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam multiple times. This is one of those times. There's a top two, really. Right? You can say there's like maybe 3, 4, 5. But Ibrahim alayhi salam, he turned away. And Hajar, she said, "Where are you going? Are you going to leave us here by ourselves?" Ibrahim was silent. He didn't say anything. She asked again, "Where are you going? Are you going to leave us here by ourselves? There's nothing here. How are we going to, find food? You have a child, he's being nursed, you have to feed him milk." Nothing. Finally, she asked, "Allahu amaraka bihada?" Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ask you to do this? Did He command you to do this? So then Ibrahim alayhi salam, he turned around and he said, "No, that's it, just one word." And, if you think about it, people may take it in different ways. Why was he ignoring them? Why did he only answer with one word? It must have been very difficult for him. Can you imagine? Ibrahim alayhi salam wanted a child for so long. He was 86 years old when Ismail alayhi salam was born. 86. Back then people lived a lot longer. They said Ibrahim alayhi salam may have lived for about, 300 years. But at 86 he finally had his first child. And now he was commanded to take his firstborn son, whom he loved very much, and the mother of his child, his wife, to take them in a place where he doesn't know what's going to happen to them. He can only trust in Allah, that this is a commandment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will be with them. That's the trust he had. It is still difficult. It still sucks to have to do some of these things. But we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we do as He commands. And Hajar, she understood this very well. Because when Ibrahim alayhi salam answered her question, when he said na'am, she replied so beautifully. She said, "Idhan." What did she say? Lan. Anybody know? She said, "Idhan lan yudayyana." If that's the case, if so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to abandon us. He's not going to abandon us. If Allah commanded you to do this, if He said, take your wife and infant child and leave them in a valley, there's no vegetation, no animals, no water, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not going to abandon us. He will be there for us. He will not take us to a point to where our lives will be in danger. Whatever happens is from the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we submit. This was the attitude that she had. This is the true tawakkul and reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Hajar alayhi salam had. And then, famous story, we all know this. When Ibrahim alayhi salam left, and they ran out of water, and Hajar's milk dried up, and she could no longer feed her son, Ismail was crying, and she was trying to look for water, so she went to the nearest mountain, which was the mountain of Safa, and she tried to look for anything or anyone that could help. Then she tried to go to the next mountain on the other side, just in case she doesn't want to miss anybody. So as she got to the foot of Safa, she ran for a little bit, and then she made her way to Marwa, and she tried looking, nothing was there. And she kept doing this until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel alayhi salam. And what did he do? To the spot where Ismail was sitting and crying, he took his wing and he struck it into the ground. And up came the water, right? And Hajar, once she saw this, right, because she's also keeping track of Ismail. She's running around. Right? I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen the actual well of Zamzam. It's not that you can see the well. When you go down and you look, it's just a giant pump. Right? But it used to be open, and this was back in the 90s. They closed it up in the early 2000s, I believe. But you can still find pictures and whatnot, and you can see it. It's not super close to Safa and Marwa, but it's not super far either, right? It's maybe, if you were to walk in a straight line from the well of Zamzam to Mount Safa, and there's no people in the way, and you're just walking straight, it would probably take like 3 to 5 minutes. It doesn't take long. It's pretty close. So she was trying to keep an eye on him, and she saw when Ismail was sitting there and crying, right? She saw the earth come up and the water come up, right? Who knows, maybe she even saw that there was a man there in the form of Jibreel alayhi salam, in the form of a man. He went and used his wing and dug up the well of Zamzam, or the water that came up from the ground. So then she ran, and subhanAllah, she thought that this water might stop, and it might just spread out everywhere and just go away. There's not going to be any more water. So she started to take the mud that was forming from the sand, and she started putting it around the water so that it would just gather in one place. So that at least she can drink some and maybe get some milk and feed her son. And the Prophet ﷺ, you know what he said? He said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on Hajar. Because if she had not done so, right? They said, the historians say that as she was doing so, she was building like this little basin so that the water would just stay like a mini well. And some of the historians say that she would say zam 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 zam, and they say that in her language it meant stop, like don't go anywhere, stay in place. But the Prophet said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on her, because if she didn't do that, she didn't try to keep the water in one place, then it would have turned into an entire river. The entire area would have just flooded. Because, think about it, the well of Zamzam, if we take the historical opinion that Ibrahim a.s. was alive 3,000 years before Isa a.s. or before the Prophet a.s., I don't remember exactly what it was. These are just kind of like historical guesses. That even if it was 3,000 years, you have 3,000 years from Ibrahim a.s. to Isa or even the Prophet a.s. Because between Isa and the Prophet a.s. it was 500 something years, so it's not that much. And then now you have another 2,000, 1,400 years. So let's say 5,000 years. For the last 5,000 years, this well has been gushing out water. Water's been pumped out. And I don't even know the statistics, but how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of gallons are pumped each day? Because can you imagine how many thousands of people are in Mecca every single day drinking Zamzam water? And then on top of that, they send Zamzam water to Medina all the time to keep all those barrels full of Zamzam. Then on top of that, you have people that come and pick up bottles of Zamzam from the Zamzam factory. There's a factory in which they fill up these jugs, right? We used to go to the factory when we go to Mecca, and we would just pick up some jugs and take them home. They're like these really big jugs, right? It's like a bigger version of the little jugs they give people who go for Hajj and Umrah. And then there's the people who go for Hajj and Umrah. They're all taking home. Imagine, if all, I don't know how many people went for Hajj this year, 3 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. If all of them, every single one of them were to take one of those little jugs, how much is that? And yet it still pumps day after day after day, and it does not run out. Right? And I'll conclude with this, because we can talk about the rest next time. It's a miracle that you you wouldn't even be surprised that the Prophet said that it would have just turned into a river. It would have just flooded all of Makkah. Right? That, subhanAllah, it's like, this is another miracle that we actually get to see today. We can see it with our own eyes, that this well has been pumping for thousands of years and has no signs of slowing down, continues to pump out water, and it's for the people. Right? Because when the water came, then those birds that normally only circle around water sources came, and you had a random Bedouin Arab tribe, not Bedouin, but nomadic Arab tribe that had left Yemen by the name of Banu Jurhum. Right? They say that the tribes of Yemen, they had left Yemen because the areas they were from were becoming increasingly hard to live in. There was like a dam that had collapsed, and it was just really hard to live there. So you had some that went all the way to the border of modern-day Saudi and Iraq. You had some that went to modern-day Bahrain. You had some that went to Yathrib and more north towards the modern-day border between Saudi Arabia and Syria and Jordan. Those areas. So you had tribes going everywhere. So one of those tribes that was looking for a place to call their home, Banu Jurhum, they saw these birds. They thought, this is odd. We've traveled around here before. We know that there's nothing there. So they went to go check it out. And they saw that there was just this woman and her baby and this water that's just gushing out and being collected in that little mini well that she built. So then they came to her and they said that, can we settle here with you? They asked her permission. So this already shows that, mashallah, Banu Jurhum, they were good people. They were honorable people. They had good manners. Because anyone else, they could have just came and said, we're just going to settle here. We're just going to set up shop and we'll take care of the well and the water, and you can come get some whenever you want. They didn't do this. They asked, can we settle here? And of course, Hajar alayhi salam, she said, okay, but I am in full control of who can access the well and whatnot. Right? And then they settled, and the story goes on, and I'll go into more details next time, but it's crazy that you have that situation that seems entirely hopeless, and on all sides, from the side of Ibrahim alayhi salam, from the side of Hajar and Ismail, even on the side of Sarah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to command Ibrahim alayhi salam to take his wife and son, his only son at the time, and take them far away, and then you just leave them there. Nobody knew what was going to happen, but they had to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They had to rely upon Him and believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not abandon them. He would make a way out for them. Just like all of us as Muslims, we need to have reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot think that, what's the famous verse? وَلَا تَيْأَسُوا مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ. Do not despair, or do not forsake the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? We can't. We have to believe that it's going to come. Right? You have people that might ask, مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. When is the victory of Allah going to come? أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. Is it not that verily the victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is near? We just have to have faith. We have to have tawakkul. We have to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and continue to do what we can do, control what we can control, obey Allah and His commandments. Right? It's also not fitting that we go around wondering why Allah allows these things to happen. Why are all these bad things happening? But then we ourselves are so far away from our deen, and we're so far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And starvation, and being genocided, and all of the above that you can even, anything bad you can think of, it's probably happening somewhere in the Muslim world. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them ease and to grant them victory, and to grant them justice, and to grant them safety, and to give them security, and to give them ownership of their land and their people and everything that they hold dear that belongs to them. So, I'll conclude there, inshallah. Next time, we'll focus a little bit more on the later years of Ibrahim a.s. and his legacy, meaning his children and all of the du'as that he made. That's something that I really want to touch upon, just kind of analyzing the du'as. Because Ibrahim a.s., if you notice in the Quran, most of the du'as mentioned in the Quran are actually from Ibrahim a.s., right? Or most of the du'as that were mentioned or recited by a person in a historic account were from Ibrahim a.s. Some from Musa, some from other prophets, but mostly majority from Ibrahim a.s. So we'll stop there as far as our story time.